Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Paideia Institute online lecture series. Today we are having our first installment of our new series in translation, from the classics to the contemporary. I'll just tell you a little bit about it. Um, Translation from the Classics to the Contemporary is a series of 4 online lectures offering perspectives on what it means to narrow the distance between texts and readers who inhabit different times, cultures, and languages through the interpretive and receptive literary practice of translation. For our first lecture, I'm very excited to welcome Chris Childers. Um, Chris Childers studied classics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and poetry at Johns Hopkins University. He lives in Baltimore, where he teaches Latin, coaches squash and tennis, and watches over his pet fish and budgies. You can learn more about Chris Childers and his work by visiting his website, chrischilderspoet.com, which I will put in the chat. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Chris.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and honor to kick off this fantastic series on translation. I do perhaps need to make some to alert you that is an old bio. I since have moved to Los Angeles. So no more Baltimore, and unfortunately, the budgies and fish were a casualty of the move. So that's uh, no longer. Sadly, we I miss them very much, but no longer accurate. Uh, I might also have mentioned in that I am the author of this sort of penguin book of Greek and Latin lyric verse, which now exists in paperback, though is not yet available in paperback in the U.S., but you can order it from the UK. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen. I have kind of a goofy presentation here, like that. Is that looking okay? All right. So this presentation is from a piece I wrote quite a long time ago for the perpetually forthcoming Oxford Handbook of Greek and Latin Metre. It's not because of me that is perpetually forthcoming. Uh, and it uses a conceit, which I'll have to apologize for at the beginning. It talks a lot about billiards, which is not a subject I know very much about. So if you're a particular, pool shark and you find me, misusing terms, I crave indulgence. Okay, putting some English on it. And it should take me about 30 minutes. I'll talk about alcaic stanzas and elegiac couplets, and then there should be some time for questions. So, all right. Are poets the original spin doctors? Think for a second about billiards. Hit the cue ball smack in the middle, and the shot goes straight. Aim the cue a tip or two to left or right, and now the ball has English on it. It hits the rail and spins, runs or reverses this way or that. Move the cue up or down, and the angle shrinks or expands. The fact that English, so called in America, perhaps because the English invented it, Brits call it side, perhaps because of a French pun on anglais and anglais, angled and English, involves only top spin and bottom spin and does not extend to all kinds of cutting, snicking, feathering, kissing, and killing, makes its upshot a little more limited than I would like. Still, a player with a good line can use English to shape her shot and set the game afoot. Consider the varieties of spin involved in poetry. There are the well-turned phrases and figural wrenchings of speech the Greeks called tropes. There's the turn and counter-turn of the choral odes, strophe and antistrophe. In modern poetry, there's the sonnet with its volta. In a tragedy, this might be the catastrophe, the reversal. There is the other kind of spinning too, the kind which spins the linen of lines into tales or yarns, which implicates the rhapsode, the stitcher of song, later a weaver of text. There is the boustrophodon or oxwise turn implicit in verse itself, from vertere as the lines on the page Recall the turn of the plow at the end of each furrow. Finally, we might note that when the Romans wanted to turn some other language into Latin, they didn't translate, they transverted. Bene. Will I be equivocating if I turn on a dime and liken Demosthenes' daughters to disc jockeys at turntables spinning records? Probably, thanks to ChatGPT for that picture. But when I read poetry in Greek or Latin, English too, what I hear is music. Not the music that would have accompanied an original choral performance, and not the sounds of the words alone. Those can be thrilling, of course. A line I've always loved. The arrows clattered on the shoulders of the wrathful god. Pallida mors pulsat pere pauperum tabernas. Pale death kicks at the doors of the poor men, right, where the peas, the plosive peas imitate the kicking noise. The ambrosial exoticism of Greek and orotund sonorities of Latin will always be a pleasure to pronounce. But music includes meter too, meters, I should say, with their many moods, stately marches and bouncy lilts, polished chants and airy innuendo. Their spell is not only oral and aural, but mental as well, just as taste is picked up not only by the tongue, but also in the nose. The ear hears, the mind registers. Yet with the meter or against it, there is also the counter melody played by rhythm, as local variation against general pattern. Beyond resolutions of longs and shorts, there are modulated pitches and accents, weightless polysyllables, and monosyllabic stomps, syntax that charges across line ends and stanza breaks, tracing its accelerations and diminuendos through headlong enjambments, gathering caesuras, halting diareses. For the sake of my conceit, we might imagine individual words as billiard balls, spinning against the rails, now of meter on this side, now of rhythm on that, in straight lines and veering sentences, all the while bumping into each other and making a lovely clatter. So how do poets spin their words in poems, and how can a translator get the right sort of English on them? Let's take one of my favorite meters, the alcaic quatrain. In both Latin and Greek, it is a musical event in itself and a mini masterpiece of orchestration. The first two lines march along at a dignified tempo, but with a skip in the middle, a syncopated stutter, a hint of swing, a rhythmical wink. Then the slow constriction of the third line, the sense of increased concentration and pressure building, to be released in the headlong accelerato of the fourth before the conclusive fermata. It has what a carnivorous poet friend used to refer to as salt in bocca alla romana. It jumps in your mouth like bacon-wrapped veal. Horace uses the strophe's built-in tempo shifts cleverly at the opening of the famous Soractiode. Vide sut alta stet nive candidum soracte, nec iam sustineant onus silvae laborantes, geliuque flumina constiterint acuto. Which I'll translate as, see how Soracte, buried in snowdrifts, gleams so white, its treetops straining to bear the load of winter, as the icy streams stand choked in the beds where they once flowed. Heap the hearth up with firewood to thaw the freeze, good Thaliarchus, and liberally let me quaff the house Sabine we've aged, more, please, for 4 years now from its Greek carafe. In Latin, one feels strongly the snow's weight in the slow third line. Move that around. There we go. The snow's weight in the slow third line. Silvae laborantes geliuque. While the contrasting speed of the fourth, flumina constiterint acuto, suggests the river's underlying flow, the root of flumen being fluere. Both meaning and scansion of constiterint, stand still, contribute to the feeling of movement in stasis or flow under ice, as the accent on the second syllable clashes with the ictus on the first and fourth. The meter itself tries to hold the word still, but it resists. Sense, sound, meter, and placement all conspire to give constiterint plenty of side, as it plays off the rapid flumina and the slow, heavy laborantes. Horace himself called this effect callida junctura, scintillant juxtaposition. Of course, it stubbornly resists translation. Okay. How have I tried to put English on this stanza? The main way is by imitating the strophe saltimbocca rhythms in a form intelligible to ordinary English prosody. In my quatrain, 2 lines of pentameter are followed by 2 of tetrameter, but with a rhythmic stomp and skip influenced by the Latin. The 2 pentameters have a sort of choriam in the middle, buried in snow, straining to bear, while the 3rd and 4th lines juxtapose a regular iambic tetrameter of winter as the icy streams against a looser, more anapestic one, stand choked in the beds where they once flowed. I'm not trying for exactitude, but rather to let the alcaic rhythms foreignize the English ones, to assimilate Horace, but not too much. I hope this is an example of putting English on. This approach has the advantage of highlighting the affinity between Horace's poem and Alcaeus 338. Menos deus, ectorano megas hemon, pepagai sin duraton rovai, cabaleton hemon epimintithes pur, indecernai soi non fede os melichron, altaramfi corsai, multa conamfi ballon gnophalon, which I have as, now Zeus is sleeting, and out of heaven a mighty storm is pouring. The ice-choked streams stand still. Yeah, I'm trying to slow that down. The ice-choked streams stand still. Forget the blizzard, we'll overcome it yet. Stoke up the fire, pour out a liberal portion of wine and water, honey sweet, and pillow your head on a comfy cushion. Sappho, too, uses the stanza once in her extant poems, with, we are told, explicit reference to Alcaeus. We're given a line he's supposed to have addressed her, Thelotites penal me colue aidos, I want to tell you something, but shame stops me, to which she responded, Aideches eslon imron e kalon, kai me titsepen glosecukakakon, aidos kenseuk eichen opata lelege spirito dikaio. Well, if you really cared for what's good and right, and your tongue weren't always dredging up filth to spray, contrition wouldn't cloud your sight, and you would say what you have to say. But to return to Horace and Alcaeus. Alcaeus was Horace's chief model, and there are many such intertexts discernible, even in the tattered scraps of Aeolic poetry that survive. Alcaeus' verse, exiguous as it is, has a rougher-hewn quality than Horace's, which the translation attempts to convey by means of simpler syntax and looser rhymes. Still, by translating both Greek and Latin alcaics into the same English stanza, I try to make the family resemblance come across. And I'll say that in the Penguin book of Greek and Latin lyric verse, this is what I tried to do for all poetic forms, is pick an English stanza and render every poem in that stanza into the same stanza in English to show that family resemblance. Horace's strophe points to a further aspect of poetic spin, the way a musical shape may connect and contrast poems across time and language. It's like a combination shot in billiards. Horace banks his poem off Alcaeus, though lacking the full text of the latter, we're hard-pressed to tell in what precise direction. Such combinations are also part of the music of poetry. To put it schematically, sound and rhythm are to meter, as meter is to genre, poem is to poet, and poet to tradition. Each meter and group of meters has its own constellation of meanings derived from the whole course of its employment in the hands of notable workers. It is also this constellation that I hear, this sense of meaning in and from context, when I sit down with Greek and Latin poems. The ancients, of course, also thought the spheres made music when they spun. These examples hint at my strategy for putting English on Latin and Greek poetry, but maybe I should just come out and say it. What I want to do is either use an already existing English form, like, say, heroic couplets, which I'll talk about soon, or manipulate the building blocks of traditional English prosody, rhyme, meter, stanza, in mildly novel ways to fangle a plausible analogy for the original. The alcaic stanza here is an example of fangling. Of course, other translational strategies, which I haven't chosen, are available. I'm going to skip the rest of that. There seem to me 3 main options for turning classical forms into English: analogous translation, mimetic translation, and free verse. The first requires choosing an analogy for the classical meter from the poetic forms already available, blank verse, heroic couplet, etc. The second involves mimesis or imitation of the original meter, which has so far been done most successfully with sapphics, though there are others as well. And the third, I think, maybe speaks for itself. Each approach is to some extent assimilative or domesticating. The mimetic is the most foreignizing of the three, but even here a translator must really assimilate by converting long syllables to stress, quantity to quality, unless she wants to play a game more recondite even than Zhukovsky's homophones. The other two approaches specify different kinds of assimilation. The analogous to traditional English prosody, the free to the more modern prosody, which has held sway in English for the past century. I should say dutifully that none of these options produces exact equivalence. Analogies between classical and English metrical forms break down because they have different histories and associations. For example, just for one example, to translate Homer's dactylic hexameters into blank verse is to render Virgil's poetic father in a meter first invented for translating his son, rather as if someone were to do the Aeneid in terza rima, which would be interesting. The mimetic approach may initially seem more authentic. Yet imagine a translator, and I'll show an example of this soon, who renders a Latin elegiac in the manner of Coleridge's famous example. In the hexameter rises the fountain's silvery column, in the pentameter I, falling in melody back. Not only will the meter's associations with sympodic poetry and epigram be inaccessible for most readers, so too will its basic scheme, at least absent a careful explanation. For every English reader who can hear what Coleridge is up to, no doubt quite a few more will be nonplussed, and that goes double for more complex meters like the Asclepiadian. That's one of Swinburne's Asclepiad couplets there. This obscurity matters if meter is indeed in the mind as much as the ear, as I said before. Lack of a shared template also reduces the expressive potential of meter. It's much more difficult to play counterpoint to an obscure or muddled pattern. So this impasse, that there are no perfect options for translating meter, merely recapitulates the whole problem of translation in miniature, that no language can reproduce exactly the productions of another. Translation is impossible, but only if by translation we mean an exact replica, as if such weren't a contradiction in terms, as if the change of language weren't enough to scuttle all hopes that one might equal unum, or hen. Happily, there are as many right answers as there are good translators. My own preference for an analogous translation inflected at times with the rhythms of the original has been stated. At times, because in some cases, pre-existing analogies make, for me, satisfactory equivalents. While meters like the Asclepiadian and alcaic don't really have good English analogies, with forcing a degree of improvisation, I tend to feel that elegiacs do have such an analogy, and it's the obvious one, heroic couplets. But first I want to offer some mimetically translated elegiacs in the style of that Coleridge couplet to illustrate the road I decided not to take with my elegiacs. Neither version of Amores 1-1, which I'm about to present, is in the Penguin Book of Greek and Latin Lyric Verse, but fingers crossed, they both will be in a volume of Love Elegy, which I hope may be out next year or maybe in 2027. I've translated the poem in both ways. First, in a formally mimetic English elegiac, second, in a formally analogous English heroic couplet. I'll read the first 4 lines of the Latin, with an emphasis on the rhythm, and then read my elegiacs. Arma gravi numero violentaque bella parabam edere, materia conveniente modis. Parerat inferior versus risisse cupido diciturat cunum surripuisse pedem. So, and I would not normally read it like that. I would normally read it more like, well, quis tibi saeve puer, dedit hoc in carmina juris, pierre domuates, non tua turba sumus. But I'll stop with the Latin now and read my English. This is my imitation of the elegiac meter. Arms and the fury of war are the subjects I was about to tackle in weighty verse matching the weight of the theme. Lines 1 and 2 were of uniform length, a fact that made Cupid chortle, they say, and snatch one of the feet from below. Poetry isn't your beat. Who gave you a new jurisdiction? Bards are Pieria's crew, goober, not lackeys of yours. What if Venus strapped on blonde-haired Minerva's equipment? What if Minerva picked up Venus's torches and blew? Who would approve of Ceres as queen of the tree-covered mountains? Or of the sharp-shooting dame managing farmhands and crops? Who would hand Phoebus, he of the glorious mane, a man-slaying javelin, while Mars strums the Aeonian lyre? Power-hungry boy, the kingdom you rule is already vast and too strong. Why invade somebody else's domain? Or is the whole world yours, Helicon's valleys included? Even Phoebus's lyre isn't secure in his hands. I had got started in style. My new first line was terrific. Then the next one came, draining the strength of the first. Also, I lack the subject matter for frivolous meters. Neither a boy nor a fine mistress with waterfall hair. That's what I whined. Straightway he opened his quiver and grabbed an arrow custom made strictly to ruin my life. Boldly bending the bow against his knee to a moon shape, "Hey," said poet, "I've got themes for your ditties right here." Ruin, damnation, that kid was sadly an accurate bowman. Now I'm on fire, and love's king in my heart that was free. These are my numbers, 6 feet in line 1 and 5 in line 2 now. Goodbye to hard-hearted war, and to the measures it likes. Garland your forehead, muse, with myrtle that clings to the shoreline. Muse whose 11-beat meters will stride through my songs. Well, while this poem purports to offer a personal anecdote narrating Ovid's decision to write love elegy, or compulsion, what it really does is offer a doubly determined explanation, both mythical and psychological, for the connection between the meter, the elegiac couplet, and the matter, the highly stylized genre of love elegy, a connection which, of course, Ovid did not invent. The psychological plot runs like this. Ovid was trying to write epic, but couldn't focus, and ended up botching every other line. He was too horny for hexameter. This narrative implies that everyone would write epic if they could, and that it's only a libidinous daze which prevents certain poets from such Homeric feats. Mythologically, the link is expressed by the way Cupid chortles and snatches a foot from each even line. In most poets, the connection between meter and matter is implicit. Referring explicitly to the meter of the poem you're writing is sort of like discussing your choice of font in a novel manuscript, or pointing out where you've used a hyphen to rove half a word over from one line to the next. It just isn't done, partly as a matter of sprezzatura, partly on the principle that magicians don't reveal their tricks and gentlemen don't kiss and tell. Ovid may be a magician, but he is not a gentleman. If he kisses, he is going to tell. Anyway, given this intimate connection between Ovid's meter and matter, it is not unreasonable to ask whether heroic couplets can do justice to Ovid's conceit. Consider, for example, Christopher Marlowe, whose elegant and accurate rendering is vitiated by the fact that his verses are not doing the thing they say they're doing. So I'll read from the beginning and end now of his version. With muse prepared, I meant to sing of arms, choosing a subject fit for fierce alarms. Both verses were alike, till love, men say, began to smile and took 1 foot away. He tells us a foot has been taken away, but both lines are 5 feet. Then at the end of the poem, he describes the elegiac couplet in a heroic couplet to which his description plainly does not apply. And my view is blocked by a little symbol here. Let my first verse be 6, my last... Let my first verse be 6, my last 5 feet. Farewell, stern war, for blunter poets meet. Elegian muse that warblest amorous lays, girt my shine brow with sea-bank myrtle sprays. Okay, so the last couplet is amazing, but it does not alternate 6 and 5 feet, as you can see. Oh, now I've Aha. So, on the other hand, I hope I've already said enough to indicate why I don't feel that my own elegiac couplet version, competent though I feel it to be, works all that well in English. Readers without prior knowledge of elegiac couplets in Latin, I think, will have a pretty hard time following the rhythm, and if they do hear it, I kind of think they won't like it that much, at least readers brought up in traditional English prosody. To my ear, the jaunty snap and swagger of heroic couplets, including rhyme, does a lot more to make us hear and feel the couplets as couplets. But in this poem in particular, a little literal infidelity is needed to imitate the poem's larger project of thematizing its own form. So this is what I came up with. Of furious wars and weapons I was getting ready to sing in measures grandly fitting. My lines were blank and strong, till a sublime giggle was heard. Cupid slipped in a rhyme. You wild child, who made poems your bailiwick? You don't rule bards. No, where the muses click. Should Venus wear Minerva's battle stuff? Or should Minerva lift love's torch and puff? Who'd sanction Ceres ruling wilderness? Or farm plots managed by the archeress? Who'd fit out fine-haired Phoebus with a sharp spear, while Mars plucks the Aeonian harp? Your realms are all too mighty, your sway grand. Ambitious baby, why would you expand? The whole world's yours now? Helicon's your zone? You want the lyre Phoebus made his own? My first line gave my new page a good start. The next sapped all the greatness from my art. Besides, for your slight rhymes I lack the matter. I've got no boy or well-coiffed girl to flatter. That's what I whined. He picked out for his bow an arrow custom made to lay me low. He stretched the bow moon-like from knee to ear and said, "Hey, bard, I've got your theme right here." Too bad for me, the kid had perfect aim. Love rules and fills my empty heart with flame. One verse makes sounds its partner duplicates. Goodbye, stern wars and lines too chaste for mates. Now set the seaside myrtle on your hair's blonde beauty, muse I'll woo in rhyming pairs. Anyone with a Loeb edition and a couple semesters of Latin could point to places where the English of these translations, and all the others in my book, spins away from semantic exactitude, from what might otherwise be called literal translation or wording. My hope is that such a spin away from the originals may also sometimes produce another spin towards them, towards affect and effect, voice and style, and ultimately the desired pocket. Okay, so that's what I had for you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was such a great talk. So we do have time for questions. If you would like to ask a question, you can use the raise hand feature that is at the bottom of your screen, I believe. And then we will call on you.
All right, stunned into silence. I said absolutely everything possible. Fantastic.
You can also feel free to just unmute and jump in or put a question in the chat and we can read it. Nathan, yes, please go ahead.
Actually, I would like to ask, I mean, how do you practically sort of get into the style of, like, I mean, when doing these translations, how often are you constantly revising and re-revising your ideas for how you're going to, put things properly into your equivalent meter.
Hmm. I mean, well, revising and re-revising. I mean, I did a lot of uh, work in just for a lot of the sort of Greek meters that are extremely elaborate, and there's only like a little like fragment here and there, or there's just little bits and scraps of things in Alcaeus or Anacreon or Simonides or whatever. I definitely did a lot of kind of like putting them against each other and really trying to figure out what is this meter, and has it appeared before, and trying to make sure that things were different. As far as revising, I mean, I think that probably, I mean, I work very slow, and usually when I finish something, it's probably pretty, it's maybe 80 or 90% of the way there. But there's always the impulse to revise, as you're rereading, and you think, oh, I wouldn't say it this way or that way, and very often revision actually takes it a little bit away from exact literal accuracy towards a more sort of speakable, um, something that sounds better to me as yeah, as English speech or as poetry in the particular line. There is a lot of revision. I think another thing that happens a lot might be, or that say I'll be doing in the love elegy book, um, is, once I'm sort of finished translating all of the poets, I think I'm really going to think hard about what seem to me the differences between Propertius and Tibullus and Ovid, and then try to make sure that I can tweak the voice or the style of the different couplets to reflect what seems to me the kind of characteristic of those poets. I mean, in general, to me, Propertius is very sort of passionate and also kind of witty. Tibullus is sort of dreamily and floats along. Ovid is the wittiest one, and you want the kind of acrobatic rhymes. You want some laugh lines here and there if you can get them. And so that's the kind of thing that in revision I'm going to try to do, is to really sort of push the poets maybe a little farther away from each other or from me, and towards what seems to me a style or voice that suits their individuality a little bit more. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what occurs to me. And thank you for the question. Oh, there's a hand up.
Kieran?
Oh, for my part, you actually, can you hear me? My camera is broken. I don't know if the audio is working.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. For my part, I was wondering partly what Nathan Henry just asked, but in the matter of like eclecticism in the register of the language you use for individual poets. I was hearing some of the stuff they were doing for this Ovid thing, and I was noticing that there was a lot of what I found very eclectic style. Like, sometimes you'd like use like more literal metonymous statements evocative of classical, like titles for I forget what it was for Diana, but like those very oblique references that sound almost mystical. And then in another line, you have Cupid calling a young kid a goober, which like for me couldn't sound any younger than the 1970s at the least. So I was wondering like what makes you use the words that you use at any one given time? And do you ever like worry that like the style that best captures the feeling of the thing might still feel a bit like might still feel a bit like mossy or patchwork in the sounds of the English words themselves?
I mean, it's a great question. And maybe, I mean, it's possible that goober is not the best choice. I think I found it sort of humorous, and it definitely fit the metrical pocket right there. But yeah, maybe that's a bit superannuated. I mean, in general, I try to I mean, I think in terms of low, middle, and high registers, and I try to think of what sort of tone or effect the poets seem to me to be sort of striking or going for. And so Ovid, he is, of course, elegant in Latin, but he's also sort of silly and fun, in my opinion. And my feeling is that he's witty, he's playing around, he's the closest thing to sort of a postmodern that we have in this kind of poetry. And so a bit of Callimachus is also a little bit like that. And so a bit of that kind of bric-a-brac diction, I think strikes me as appropriate. I wouldn't use those terms in other like Pindar is all very lofty, and I try to keep the diction as high as I can while maintaining a sort of speakable feel. Um, but that's basically what it's about. I mean, I have in my Substack blog a sort of a three-part essay called "A Mockingbird Among Nightingales," where I try to talk a little bit about uh, about trying to make the different poets sound different from each other. And one way is definitely diction. But it's got to be sort of broad, like Hipponax has very low diction. Pindar is very high. A lot of them are middle. But I want to avoid just the sort of like just the sort of like nondescript middle register, which is the kind of standard of translation because it doesn't call any attention to itself, just a nondescript register. But I just kind of think that there's sort of more going on in these poems, and I want to put them in a voice that seems to me that feels good to me. But we all have different idiolects, right? Different senses in our head of what is sayable or unsayable, and it may be that that my own is a little eclectic and causes me sometimes to reach for words like goober that perhaps I should reconsider goober. It's a fair point, but there is I can't take Ovid seriously, and I think that's a big part of why I chose some of the words I did.
Understandable.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have a couple questions in the chat. There's one question from Paul. I actually really like this question because I noticed this too. So Paul's asking, could you tell us a little bit about the meter of the presentation this evening? Because it sounded like poetry.
Yeah. 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 So there were a lot of there was me. I mean, so the alcaic stanzas. Let's see if I can flip back to it. Yeah, that's the idea. The archaic stanzas have they have two 5-beat lines, pentameter. Forget the blizzard, we'll overcome it yet. Stoke up the fire, pour out a liberal portion. Okay, feminine rhyme, but all right. Of wine and water, honey, sweet, 4 beats, and pillow your head on a comfy cushion. So that's a 4-beat line with a little more of kind of an anapestic movement to reflect the way the actual alcaic is. Moltha con amphiballon gnophalon, right? If you hear that. And then the other two, yeah, so this is my imitation of elegiac couplets. Arms and the fury of war, or the subjects I was about to tackle in weighty verse, matching the weight of the theme, right? So that's an imitation of the meter of the Latin elegiac, arma gravi numero violentaque bella parabam, edere materia conveniente modis. So that's that, and then the heroic couplets are blank or iambic pentameter. So a furious wars and weapons I was getting, ready to sing in measures grandly fitting, right? So 5-beat lines with the da-dum 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 for the most part, as standard in heroic couplets. So yeah, so I'm glad it sounds like poetry. It wants to be. It wants to be poetry, or at least poetic.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, maybe I misunderstood the question, but the question that I was sort of gathering from this is sort of how do you use meter in your writing, like when you were talking about the English and the pool metaphor. It sounds like you were using a meter in the way that you were presenting.
Oh, you mean the prose?
Yeah.
The prose sounded like poetry. Well, maybe that's just it was labored over. Yeah, I mean, sorry if I just recapitulated the entire the talk. Yeah, the prose is prose, but I suppose I would say this that maybe when I was kind of learning poetry, I remember encountering a quote from I don't know if it was Anthony Hecht or Richard Wilbur, maybe a sort of a casual quote that was that no one has written any poetry worth reading if they have not memorized a great deal, and I mean a very great deal of poetry by heart. And so I have memorized quite a lot of poetry, a lot more in English than in Latin or Greek, but a bit in Latin and Greek as well. And I did that both because I loved it and also because I wanted to have this sort of natural feel for writing metrical poetry, a natural kind of sense of rhythm and meter. And if some of that comes, if some of that sort of bleeds over, I suppose, into a prose style, then I so much the better, I suppose. Um, I remember a professor of mine in college too said had one of it told had a story about when one of his students asked Toni Morrison about like was something a line like how sweet the juice, the jailed up juice and free or something like that, and someone pointed out to her that it was pentameter, and she launched into an extemporaneous lecture on the value of English scansion for writing prose. So maybe it. I don't. I wasn't consciously trying to make anything scan, but maybe it has some sort of effect. Anyway, so I guess that's that answer. Okay, the next question, if I can, in an academic setting, is the loss of semantics in this poetic translation ever concerning? Well, I don't think I'm translating for an academic setting, really. I think I'm translating for readers and to try to make a feeling of poetry accessible to readers. Now, I would obviously not love it for um, professors to think, oh, this is too inaccurate. It gets something wrong. It loses too much, and then not be willing to use it. I hope that doesn't happen, and I hope that I hope that it is accurate in terms of the intention, and I hope it has a lot of accuracy of effect. Um, but as you can see, my number one fidelity, since the fidelity is to poetry, to the feeling of poetry, the fact that these are good poems in Latin and Greek, and that I want to make them sound as much like good poems in English as I can. Um, but it's also, yes, it's not if I were writing an academic paper and I were trying to argue about the meaning of a couplet of Ovid, I would not do it in rhyme. I would try to make it as literal and accurate as I can because I would be addressing that to other people who know the Latin, but who maybe have a different way of construing it. Uh, let's see.
I have a question, if I'm not interrupting anyone else's question. Chris, does it ever happen to you when you're translating that because I did hear you say that you sometimes feel that you have to pull yourself back to the poet. I, I may have misheard that, but do you ever think that I could do a better job of this? I could take this poem of Simonides and I could not improve upon Simonides, but have my own poem. And you find yourself creating a poem, which then perhaps I'm guessing you put in a different drawer because this is your own creation. And I'm wondering if you have a drawer filled with your own poetry, if you go off on creative flights inspired by the Greek and Latin that you've been translating.
Well, I have poems of my own, and they're not in a drawer. I do publish them, and I have a manuscript of my own poems, which I'm sending around to contests, and hopefully will be a book someday. There is one poem in the Penguin book where I did kind of let myself go a little bit. It's a Callimachus uh, uh, poem like a birthday poem. I think Callimachus Iambus 12. It's the one of the only poems we have, and maybe in a trochaic trimeter, maybe a poem that's in trochaic trimeter. And it was kind of missing a chunk at the beginning and the end, and had some other missing bits, but we could kind of see the shape of the poem really well. And so I just kind of wrote my own beginning and end, and I put it in brackets and italics, and I said what I was doing in my note. But it was just very tempting. You have a birthday poem for the kid of Callimachus' friend Leo. Um, but I think when I think about, but I am mostly trying to channel the original poets. And I guess what I said about pulling back to the original poet, there's a sense of triangulating voices. You know, when you have a bunch of voices next to each other in a book and you want them to sound different from each other and like themselves, to me, that's a stylistic question or problem. And so then, and when you're kind of going through, and the first thing you're doing is getting the meaning, getting the shape, getting the kind of poetic shape of, say, couplets, a bunch of rhyming couplets. You got to find the rhymes, takes a while. And then at a certain point, I'm thinking, okay, I've kind of got the text, I've got a first draft, and now how can I make this feel like more quintessentially Ovidian? Can I tweak the style to make this feel more like Ovid, like my sense of Ovid? Can I tweak the style to make this feel a little more like my sense of Propertius, and maybe distinguish it in a bit more of a consistent way from, say, Tibullus and Ovid in that book? So that's kind of what I meant. I'm not generally, I'm not generally extemporizing onto the originals. Like Robert Lowell, for example, like taking a few lines and then running off on my own. I am trying to do what I would consider real translating. There's a couple more in the chat, which I can read. From Angelina, at what point do you think students and maybe even professors should try translating with respect to meter, style, verse, etc.? I don't want to prescribe what people should or shouldn't do. I think if you have an interest in it, I think it's worth doing. I think for students, probably it does. If what we want from students is that they have a sense of the madeness of a translation, and really, when you maybe the first time you pick up a translated book, maybe you think you are reading Homer or you are reading Virgil, or and then maybe once you've read 5 different versions of the Iliad, you sort of realize, I'm reading Lattimore's Homer, I'm reading Emily Wilson's Homer. You feel very much the difference. And so the exercise is probably good for students in terms of, both as a creative exercise, sort of, a verbal, an exercise in verbal dexterity. It's kind of like a word problem. It's sort of like Sudoku or something, rhyming, and you got to say this thing and you got to rhyme it or versify it in this way. So there's a certain mental flexibility, verbal flexibility it requires, which is salutary in itself. And then also the sense of awareness of what translators are actually doing, and having done it yourself a bit as a student, I think maybe is good for that. As far as others, if you want, if you're interested, great. I think I'm a member of the SCS translation committee, and I think that at the next SCS we're going to be doing some kind of verse translation workshop where some people will present a few short passages from either Greek or Latin, and then they'll be able to break up into groups, and people will translate. We'll sort of try to do their own verse translation of a different passage based on some of the criticism or commentary that was given. And if that's of interest, come to that. Presumably I'll be there. Probably it's in San Francisco, so I should be there. That it would be fun. I mean, it is fun. So thanks for that question. Lillian asks that I spoke at the beginning about how one finds music through the meter of poetry, being that presumably all of this originally was sung, not read. Do I think that translation style evolves with the evolution of music? Do I think that this is good and that even dead language must evolve? or do I think that the history and context of the time of the poem is lost with the evolution of the translation? I mean, the original music, the original context of performance is definitely lost, and I don't necessarily think it's good. I mean, I would love to see like a definitive recreation of Alkmann's Parthenon. You know, like what were they doing? They were singing at the perhaps at the rise of the Pleiades, out at night at a panuchia or something, and where they talk, is it the names of the different girls in the chorus, like what's going on there? I think that's absolutely lost. I think that what we have in Metre is a kind of fossil record of the original performance context, and I think that that is. But I think it was also even lost, say, by the Hellenistic period. I think that when the Alexandrians were gathering Alcman and Sappho and Pindar into volumes, I don't think they really could they would know the music. I don't think they know what the music was of, say, Olympian One. And they might not have even sort of fully, kind of understood the performance context and all of those like deictic things where they're pointing to each other, they're pointing to the moon, they're pointing to this or that, and they assume you're there to look at what they're pointing to. That's all gone. It's like there's a metaphor in my book that I got from somewhere. I didn't make it up. I forgot where I got it, but about or an anecdote in Vasari that once the Michelangelo was commissioned to build the greatest snowman ever made, and he did it, and then it all melted, and we don't have it anymore. And the context is 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 like that. So the closest we can get, we can imagine, I think, with like say the meters of Pindar, we can imagine that there were with each metrical line there was a sort of melody and maybe a sort of dance step that went along with this line, and that kind of repeated when the same point of the antistrophe came up, or then the epode, and then the same line of the next epode, and so that would enable people to know where they were in the verse. But yeah, I don't think there's much of any way. Though the one other thing I've seen is people looking at the pitch accents, at the certain point of a line and choral odes, and actually being able to extrapolate a little bit of a melody from that. And so there may be some that there that's over my head. I'm not doing that, but it's cool, and I would love to hear it. I'd love to hear these kind of recreations of sung versions of, say, tragic choruses or Pindar. Okay, I don't know if that's an answer. I hope so. Thanks for the question. And this is Kason says, have I ever dabbled in the practice of writing original poetry in the ancient languages? Ooh, not so much. It's a bit beyond me. I have struggled maybe here and there. I mean, actually, I worked for Paideia for a little bit and worked on some of kind of early drafts of some of the Latin texts. And there were times when I did find myself, I think once maybe I translated Richard Wilbur's poem For the Etruscan Poets. I attempted to translate that into dactylic hexameter in Latin. I think I didn't do a great job. John Meyer did a much better job of that than me. So I think that yeah, I'm not at that level. I know Coleridge wrote some Greek sapphics. Um, Smart guy. I'm not quite there with my classical versification. So I have not done much of that. Certainly no original poems. But thanks for the question. Thanks for the the obviously elevated assessment of my classicism that question implies. So somebody was about to come on and say something, maybe.
We have a few minutes left, so if there's one last question, we have time. Otherwise, oh, I guess, yeah, so there's one more question in the chat. So
Yeah.
Kieran is asking, do you want to read it aloud or shall I read it?
Yeah, have I ever tried my hand at medieval Latin poetry with meters and rhyming schemes? I have not done that either. I do enjoy it. I certainly do enjoy that kind of poetry. Oh, but have I ever tried my hand maybe at translating that poetry? That may be what it, rather than composing it. Well, no, I haven't done either. But uh, yeah, I mean, I think I am interested in expanding into some more, yeah, more Neo-Latin, maybe more recent Latin. One of the criticisms of the book is that it stops at Martial and doesn't go into Prudentius or other kind of later, um, late antique poets. And yeah, I mean, I think that would be a fun thing to do, but I have not yet done it. I mean, to keep it singable to the tune, uh, for like say the Carmen of Burana or whatever, would definitely be a fun, difficult challenge and would require a degree of liberty, but it would be fun.